Welcome to Redefined Church. I'm Joel Van Brigel, and I'm delighted that you've chosen to join us on Good Friday. We're a gathering of people diverse from many different backgrounds who are exploring faith at the intersection of life, community, and mission. Why Redefined? Well, we've noticed that the timeless message of Jesus Christ has been complicated by unnecessary religious obstacles. Simply put, we believe that every person can have a meaningful relationship with God, and we hope to clear the path for you to do that. Jesus welcomed people to belong. He walked with them so that they would believe, and He empowered them to become the people that He designed us to be. We invite you to join us in this incredible faith journey, and we encourage you to participate in whatever way you feel comfortable. Please join us tonight as we celebrate Good Friday.
Thank you and welcome to our online Good Friday gathering. And you might wonder by yourself, Good Friday, why do they call it Good Friday? Isn't this the day that we think of the bloody murder of Jesus on a cross, the most horrific death ever? Why would you call it good? And then in 1 Corinthians 11 verse 26, Paul, when he talks about communion, says, proclaim the Lord's death until you come. Why do we do that? Is it not much more fun to talk about the resurrection? Is it not much more important to talk about the resurrection? Isn't that when all the good things are happening? That's the place where joy is. Why are we to focus on all these bloody, cruel things? But we have to realize that the crucifixion of Jesus is a pivot point in history. It is the moment where everything changed. Now, throughout history, the crucifixion of Jesus is never debated. The four Gospels give a very detailed account about what happened during the time. And remember that these Gospels were written where most people could still remember or were witnesses of the facts that had happened. Also, a Jewish historian, Josephus, gives very clear details about what happened that day. That Jesus did exist, that he was crucified, and that he was risen again. So there is no doubt by any of the scholars, Christian or not non-Christian, that Jesus existed and that he was crucified on the cross as portrayed in the Gospels and in the Bible. But the question is, why was he crucified? For the Romans, Jesus was a rebel leader. He was challenging the authority and the sovereignty of the Roman Empire. You know, think about what we celebrated last week, the triumphal entry into Jerusalem as a king. You can imagine that the Roman authorities were getting nervous. What is happening? A new king, somebody that's going to take authority and going to push us aside. So they were threatened, and their sovereignty and their rule was threatened. And that's why he was crucified as a rebel, as a political leader, as a criminal. Crucifixion was a political and a very public message for the Romans. It basically said, we are in charge. It said, you are our property, and if you threaten our sovereignty, we will deal with it accordingly. Remember that there was a message nailed to the cross. Jesus, the King of the Jews. And basically, that was just mockery. It was just the Roman leaders insulting Jesus. Here is the king, your king. But we are in control. We nailed him to the cross. For the Jews, he was also a threat. He claimed to be the Messiah. He claimed to be God. Basically, for them, he was a false prophet, leading Israel astray, and he needed to be killed. He was proclaiming, the message that he was proclaiming would eventually, they thought, overthrow all their most sacred symbols. And replacing those sacred symbols with loyalty to Jesus and not to the system that was in place. If not stopped, the Jewish leaders believed, people would start believing Jesus and following him and threatening the balance that they had with the Roman authorities. And they were afraid that the Roman authorities would step in and take everything away that they had accomplished. So Jesus was a threat to many people. And that is why he was crucified. Now, the whole crucifixion process, we will not go into detail because it's pretty horrific. But it started with a flogging. The flogging was so intense that the Bible describes him that he was that Jesus, after being flogged, was almost beyond human description. He was so full of wounds and blood that people could hardly recognize him. And then he was crucified. Now, the crucifixion was something that was invented by the Persians 500 years earlier. And it was considered the most painful torture known to man at that time. C.S. Lewis, a famous writer, wrote this about the cross. And he said, the cross is so horrific that it did not become a form of art until the 5th century. When everybody who knew what the cross was standing for, what the cross meant, who had seen people die on the cross, had died. So why did it become a symbol for Christians? I mean, why did we choose the cross as our symbol? We could have chosen so many other things. We could have chosen a fishing boat. I mean, Jesus used fishing boats constantly to preach from. We could have used a towel, indicating the way he was serving people. We could have chosen a lamb standing for the sacrifice, but we chose the cross, the remembrance of a bloody murder of an innocent man. Why did we do that? Because exactly the cross is the center of our message. Without the cross, Christianity is nothing more than a nice series of ideas about life. That day on that cross, something meaningful happened. That day on that cross, the event that was taking place there, it changed reality. And it changed how humans are going to relate to God. In Mark, the Gospel of Mark, we read that Jesus was crucified around 9 o'clock in the morning. And then in Matthew, in Matthew 27, we read in verse 45, that suddenly from noon, from 12 o'clock till 3 in the afternoon, everything went dark. Basically, the lights went out. Thales, another historian, describes that there was a solar eclipse at that moment. A solar eclipse that was very strange, that was not expected. But there was a solar eclipse and everything went dark. And Jesus died during the Passover time. He died in the time when the Jews were celebrating Passover. Now, at that moment that Jesus is hanging on the cross, that everything is going dark, the priests are preparing for the evening meal, the evening sacrifice. The sacrifice where they atone, where they make atonement for the sins of the people. And while they are preparing the sacrifice, everything goes dark. And Matthew describes that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jesus dies. He speaks his last words. And Matthew describes the moment Jesus died, the curtain that separated the Holy of Holies, the place where God dwells in the temple, where the priest could only come once in a while on this very special circumstances with special sacrifices, that curtain was torn. And Matthew describes that the curtain was torn from the top down. It's almost like somebody took the top of that curtain and ripped it apart, opening up the door to the holiest of holies, the place where God dwells. Jesus' death was really the ultimate sacrifice. Hebrews 9 describes that process. And the writer of Hebrews says in verse 29 of chapter 9, and he did not enter to offer himself again and again. Jesus did not go and make a sacrifice every day or every week or every month, the same way the priest would do that. But he says he appeared once and for all to put away sin by his sacrifice. And that is why the cross is crucial. That is why the cross changed everything. Once and for all, the problem of sin was dealt with. Herman Bavinck, he's a Reformed theologian, writes the following. He says, in his dying, Christ was not only a witness and a guide, he was not just a martyr and a hero, or a prophet and a king. He was above all a priest. He was active as a priest. And his dying was a sacrifice given freely by him. In Mark chapter 10 verse 45, Mark writes that where Jesus speaks, says, for the Son of Man did not come to be served, but he came to give his life as a ransom for many. And that is what Jesus did. He died on the cross to make atonement for our sins. But why? Because sin is keeping us away from God. It's keeping us from having a connection with God. When we go, Martin Luther wrote in his commentary about Romans, and he wrote that when he was studying Romans, he realized that chapter 3, verse 23 was basically the heart of the biblical story. And it says there that for all have sinned and have fallen short of the glory for God. And that's the reality for all of us. We all have sinned and we fall short of the glory for God. Now we have to understand that when God made mankind, when we go back all the way to the beginning of the Bible in Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, where God created man and woman, He created them in His own image. He created them to have a relationship with them. He created them so that they could enjoy the glory of God. He created them so that they could reflect the glory of God, that they would be image bearers, mirrors of what God was like. That through Adam and Eve and through humankind, people will know what God is like. But we read in chapter 3 that Adam and Eve sinned. They were not happy. They were not satisfied with the things that God had given them, but instead they wanted to be like God. And they sinned, and because of their sin, we are suffering today. Martin Luther, again, in his commentary about the Ten Commandments, notices that the first commandment is first for a very special reason. The first commandment is, "You shall have no other gods before me." And he says this is first intentionally, because it is the highest priority, but it's not only the highest priority, it's also the first commandment we break when we sin. He says whenever we sin, we are in essence prioritizing ourselves before God. We're saying, God, what I want is more important than what you want. And the consequence of sin is that our connection with God is broken. Is that we don't live up to the potential that God has given us. But the moment Adam and Eve sinned, God made a promise to deal with the problem of sin. And He says in Genesis 3 verse 15, and He speaks to the snake, to the serpent, and He says, "I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. Her offspring will attack your head, and you will attack her offspring's heel." And this is exactly what happened at the cross. Paul describes it well in Colossians 2. In verse 13 he says, "And you, even though you were dead in your transgressions, He nevertheless made you alive with Him, having forgiven all your transgressions." He says, Paul says, He has destroyed what was against us, and He has taken it away by nailing it to the cross. Disarming the rulers and authorities, He made a public disgrace of them, triumphing over them by the cross. And when Jesus was nailed to the cross, it looked like that the rulers and authorities had won. The man, Jesus, was dead. But if you pull back the veil and look behind what is happening, you see the ancient enemy of humankind, Satan. And as Jesus is dying, Satan, sin, and death are defeated. The fatal wound from the serpent was also the climactic victory of Jesus. Now, when we look at the Old Testament, we see the whole process of sacrifices. And those sacrifices, they basically were a shadow pointing towards what is to come. And when Jesus died on the cross as a sacrifice, he did what the sacrifices could not do. Now, the whole thing is not an accident that Jesus was there during Passover. It was deliberately chosen. Jesus didn't go to Jerusalem to preach and then was caught by surprise. He intentionally went to Jerusalem during the Passover because the Passover meal and the Passover feast was something very important. It was the time when the Jews celebrated their delivery out of slavery from Egypt. They celebrated their delivery from death. Remember the story. Yeah, the Israelites were in Egypt, became slaves, had a horrible life. Moses came through a whole series of events, where the last one was that all firstborn were killed, except by those whose doors were smeared with the blood of a lamb. And that is what the Israelites were celebrating. Their delivery from death, their delivery out of slavery, their delivery from sin. And as Jesus is having his Passover meal with his disciples, he is showing them that things are going to change. That what is going to happen on that cross is literally changing everything. He showed them the new meaning of Passover. And he showed them that Passover was pointing towards him. It was Jesus, the prophet and leader, who would deliver them from slavery and sin and bring them into a new reality where God would be among them. Remember the name that Jesus had when he was born. It says, Emmanuel, God with us. And the death of Jesus, the veil that was torn, signifies this whole idea where God is now taking place, where God is now finding a home among his people. Where God is now living with us. And so at the cross, sin was dealt with once and for all. And it allows us to return to our original purpose, the purpose that God had designed for mankind, created in his image, to enjoy the glory of God, to reflect the glory of God, and to be an image bearer of God in this world. That is why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11 verse 26, every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, proclaim the death of the Lord until he comes. Because the death of Jesus, Good Friday, changed everything. This Sunday, this Easter Sunday, we will have communion together. And I hope that we will proclaim. And remember, proclaim is not something you do quietly. It's not something that you do inside your room. When you proclaim something, you want to make it public. You want to make it official. You want everybody to know this is what's happening. And that's our call. That's the call for us. We, restored in the image of God. We, restored in the glory of God. We, who are image bearers of God. We who are showing the world what God is like, cannot be hidden, cannot be in our little corner. It needs to be proclaimed loudly, proudly, positively. The cross has changed everything. Our task is not ended. Our task has not ended at the cross. But at the cross, our task begins to proclaim the work of Jesus done at the cross. To be image bearers. At the cross, our life is changed. Our life is restored to God's original intention. And that's why we need to proclaim. Because it truly is the event that changed everything.
The cross truly is a symbol of openness and a symbol of bringing reconciliation, bringing right relationship between us and God. I want to pray with you today as we ponder this Good Friday. We think about what Jesus has done for us, and He invites you to participate in that. Would you pray with me? Lord, I thank you for your goodness and your faithfulness, and I thank you for your love that was extended with your arms on a cross as an extension of a way to reach me and to reach those who are watching this video. We recognize that you have reached out to us in love, in a desire to make a way that we can have right relationship with you. We ask you to forgive us, and Lord, I pray that you would allow us to experience your love and your hope and the life that you have designed for us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. If you have any questions or you have a desire for someone to pray with you, we would love to connect with you. Send us a private message and we would love to reach out to you and to connect with you and pray with you and help you take the next step in your faith journey. May God bless you, and as we come to Easter on Sunday, come prepared to receive communion together. Perhaps you'll need to have some bread or some juice or some wine, whatever is available to you. But we want to be able to participate online this week together, taking the Lord's Supper and remembering His death and celebrating His resurrection. God bless you, and we'll see you on Sunday.